In the deep corners of the galaxy, a race of aliens found themselves in a perilous situation. Their once thriving world was under attack, and the enemy was unlike anything they had ever faced. As the skies above their home planet were filled with the echoes of battle and the cries of dying cities, the leaders of the alien species knew they had to act fast. Desperation filled their hearts, and their only hope lay in one thing: their call for help. The planet's capital was now a battlefield, with towering structures burning and explosions lighting up the sky. In the heart of the command center, high above the chaos, the alien commanders gathered. Their once proud civilization was crumbling before their very eyes. There was no choice left. They needed reinforcements. Fast. With trembling hands, the lead commander activated the ancient, yet advanced, communication system. This system was their only means of contacting other galaxies. As the commander's fingers flew across the controls, a series of beeping sounds filled the room. The massive screen in front of him flickered to life, showing a map of the galaxy with flashing indicators of potential allies. He knew that the time was ticking, and their world's fate rested in the hands of the distant races who might answer their call. "Send the signal," the commander ordered, his voice steady despite the panic that surged beneath his calm exterior. His second-in-command, a sharp-eyed alien with silver skin, nodded and punched in the final coordinates. With a single press, a beam of light shot into the vast unknown, carrying their desperate plea. For a brief moment, silence took over the room. The only sound was the soft hum of the communication device. The commander's heart raced. The call was out there now. Somewhere in the cold void of space, a response would come if they were lucky. But the question lingered in the back of their minds: would help arrive in time? And, more importantly, would it be the right kind of help? As the commander stood, watching the screen, his mind flashed to the memories of past battles. He had fought many wars in his time, but never had the stakes felt so high. This was not just the survival of their planet, it was the survival of their entire race. And, judging by the size of the invading enemy fleet, they would need more than just reinforcements. They needed strength beyond anything they had ever known. The minutes felt like hours as the signal traveled across the stars. Each passing second stretched the tension tighter and tighter. The alien commanders were on edge, their eyes never leaving the flickering screen. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the first response came. A message flashed across the screen: "Reinforcements are on the way." A wave of relief washed over the room. The commander let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. But as quickly as the relief came, doubt began to creep in. The message was too simple, too quick. Was it genuine? Was this the help they truly needed? The aliens had many allies, some closer than others. There were peaceful races who shared their values and technology, but there were also others, races that thrived on war and conflict. The commander's mind raced through all possibilities. He knew that, depending on who responded, their situation could either improve dramatically or spiral into an even worse nightmare. Without a second thought, the commander signaled for an immediate update. He needed more information, and he needed it fast. The screen blinked again, and a new message appeared. "Backup, arriving in 30 minutes. Prepare for support." The words were short, yet they carried a sense of finality. The countdown had begun. 30 minutes, that was all they had left. 30 minutes before the help they so desperately needed arrived. But as the commander read those words, something gnawed at him. The backup that was coming, was it the help they needed? Were the reinforcements truly strong enough to face the enemy, or was this another trap? He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He turned to his second-in-command. "We need to make sure this isn't a mistake. Prepare the fleet. If these reinforcements are not what we expect." He paused, swallowing hard. "We will be ready for anything." His second-in-command nodded, a look of grim determination in their eyes. They had all fought together before, and they knew that when the time came, they would stand together again. But there was no denying the fear in their hearts. This was different. The stakes were higher than ever before. The countdown continued, and time seemed to stretch endlessly. The alien commanders looked to each other, exchanging nervous glances. No one spoke, but the tension in the room was palpable. This was it, the moment that would define their fate. Would the backup be enough, or would they face a new, terrifying enemy far worse than the one they already fought? The commanders stood in front of the massive viewport, gazing out at the stars. In the distance, beyond the burning cities and endless conflict, there was a glimmer of hope, but even that was fading. The fate of their world was now in the hands of the unknown, and as the final seconds ticked down, the question remained: what would emerge from the darkness of space? The room was silent, the only sound coming from the low hum of the communication console. The alien commander stood frozen, his eyes locked on the blinking screen. The backup was coming, yet the words felt hollow. He had expected more than a simple response, more than a promise. Was this truly the salvation they needed, or was it just another cruel twist of fate? The air was thick with anticipation. The alien race had always been known for its advanced technology, for its ability to adapt, but even they were starting to feel the weight of their desperation. The planet was burning, and the enemy continued to advance, relentless and merciless. Time was running out, and the hope of reinforcements seemed almost too good to be true. The commander turned toward his second-in-command, his mind racing. "We've prepared for this, but are we ready for that?" he asked, motioning toward the message. The second-in-command, her silver eyes narrowing, didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved to the tactical display, fingers gliding over the smooth surface of the console as she examined the incoming fleet. A flicker of light appeared on the screen. Slowly, one by one, small dots began to form in the distance. Ships, lots of ships, but something felt ... off. These were not the ships they had expected. These were no peaceful allies, no dignified reinforcements. They were something darker. The ships' designs were jagged, rough, and unsettling. They were not made for peace, but for war. The commander's chest tightened. His heart began to race. What were these ships? The comm system crackled to life, and a voice, cold and harsh, echoed through the room. "We are here. Prepare for battle." His blood ran cold. These weren't the kind of reinforcements they needed. These were no allies, they were an invasion. The alien race had made a grave mistake by calling for help, for this new force was something entirely different, something they had never seen before. Suddenly, the first wave of ships entered the planet's atmosphere, cutting through the clouds like blades through water. They were enormous, their surfaces gleaming darkly under the light of the distant stars. These ships were built for destruction, not rescue. The moment they landed, the ground shook with the force of their arrival. The aliens stared at the ships, fear creeping into their hearts. They had called for help, but what they had summoned was a nightmare. "Commander," the second-in-command said, her voice barely a whisper, "this wasn't what we expected. We have no idea what we're facing." The commander swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. What were these beings, and why did they look so ... hungry? The ships began to deploy their occupants all, fearsome creatures clad in dark armor. Their faces were hidden, but their movements spoke of ruthless efficiency. They walked with a predatory grace, their eyes glowing red from beneath their helmets. The first wave of soldiers emerged, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. They were terrifying, no other word could describe them. Their presence was overwhelming, their power palpable in the air. The aliens had hoped for an army that would fight alongside them, but instead, they had been given a force that seemed hell-bent on destroying everything in their path. The commander couldn't help but think of the strange, foreboding message he had received earlier. Backup arriving in 30 minutes. Prepare for support. Had the message been a trick? Had these creatures always been the ones coming? They looked nothing like the allies the alien race had known, and the commander couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. The ships loomed above them, their forms casting long shadows over the desolate city. The alien soldiers who had fought so hard to defend their planet began to retreat, unsure of how to deal with these new arrivals. They had never seen such warriors. These weren't just soldiers. These were beasts, creatures born for destruction. They had come to fight, but they had come to fight for their own cause, not to defend anyone else. "Are you sure this is the backup we called for?" the commander asked his second-in-command, his voice tense. She shook her head slowly, her face pale. "No, this is something else, something ... worse." The alien race, so confident just hours before, now found themselves caught in a trap of their own making. They had called for help, but the answer had come in the form of a nightmare they could not control. As the beasts approached, their heavy steps causing the ground to tremble, the commander made a decision. There was no going back now. They couldn't retreat, they had no choice but to fight. The stakes had changed. It was no longer about defending their world from invaders. Now it was about surviving the creatures that had come to answer their call for help. But the more the commander watched them, the more he realized just how terrifying these creatures were. The way they moved, quick and purposeful, spoke of years of experience in battle. They didn't fight for honor. They didn't fight for survival. They fought because it was their nature. "Prepare the weapons," the commander ordered. "We don't have a choice." The alien forces began to scramble, assembling their weapons and preparing for the battle they never thought they'd face. They had called for backup, but what had arrived was nothing short of hell itself. And now, they had to Face it, head dash on dot. As the first of the creatures drew closer, the commander braced himself for the fight of his life. He didn't know if they would win, or if they would survive. But one thing was clear, their world was in danger. And the real battle was just beginning. The ground rumbled beneath them as the beasts closed in. The alien race had summoned help, but what had arrived was not their salvation. It was the beginning of their greatest nightmare. The sky above the city rippled with the thunderous sound of engines, and the air itself seemed to tremble as the ships continued their descent. Each one was like a dark monolith, casting long shadows over the alien landscape. These were no ordinary reinforcements. The creatures that emerged from them were far from anything the aliens had ever encountered, and their terrifying presence only grew more apparent as the final ship landed, its massive metal feet scraping against the ground with an almost deafening screech. The first soldiers that stepped onto the planet's surface were not like the soldiers the aliens had hoped for. These creatures were something else, beasts. Their armor was scarred, covered in strange markings, and their movements were savage, fluid, and terrifyingly fast. They seemed more like predators than warriors, with eyes that burned with an unsettling hunger. The air grew thick with a scent of fear as the creatures advanced, their imposing figures towering over the trembling alien soldiers. "These are not the backup we called for," the commander muttered under his breath, his mind racing. His earlier concerns had been nothing more than a quiet whisper, but now they roared in his ears, louder and more insistent. These were not allies. These were the predators, and they had no intention of fighting alongside the aliens. They were here for their own reasons, and the aliens were nothing more than obstacles in their way. The soldiers lined up, weapons raised, ready to defend their city, their world, but a chilling realization swept through them. These new arrivals weren't here to negotiate. They didn't come in peace, nor did they come to fight for the alien race's survival. They came to conquer, to destroy. The leader of the beasts, a towering figure clad in dark, jagged armor, stepped forward, his every movement precise and powerful. His presence alone commanded respect. His deep, gravelly voice echoed through the alien city, vibrating in the bones of every living creature around him. "We didn't come here to save you. We came because your war is now ours." The commander's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment they had all dreaded, the moment the backup they had begged for turned into their worst nightmare. The beasts had come not as saviors, but as conquerors, and the alien race, for all their technology and power, stood no chance against them. The tension in the air grew unbearable. The alien soldiers were prepared to fight, but now they had no idea what they were facing. These weren't invaders, they were something far worse. And the more they watched, the more they realized that these creatures weren't just here to defeat them. They were here to make them beg for mercy. Without warning, the first wave of the beasts attacked. The sound of their war cries filled the air, like the growl of a predator stalking its prey. The alien soldiers fired, their weapons discharging, in a flurry of energy blasts, but it was clear that their weapons were useless against the relentless assault of the beasts. The creatures moved like shadows, too fast, too strong, their claws rending through the alien defenses with ease. The commander stood frozen, his mind racing. This was impossible. How had it come to this? The backup they had called for, the hope they had placed in the distant message, was nothing more than a cruel trick. The beasts weren't here to help, they were here to wipe them out. As the battle raged on, the commander's gaze drifted to the leader of the beasts. The creature seemed to relish the chaos, his cold eyes watching with twisted amusement as his soldiers tore through the alien ranks. It was as though they had known this day would come when the aliens would be desperate enough to call for help, and when that help would turn out to be the very thing that destroyed them. The second wave arrived shortly after, a swarm of more beasts, their sheer numbers overwhelming the alien forces. It was clear now that there was no escape. The aliens were outnumbered and outclassed. Their only hope now was survival, but even that seemed distant. "Fall back," the commander shouted, trying to rally his forces. "Retreat to the underground bunkers." But his voice barely reached their ears over the deafening roar of the battle. The alien soldiers, panicked and disorganized, scrambled to find cover, but it was too late. The beasts were already on top of them, their monstrous strength tearing through their defenses with terrifying ease. The commander's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a fight for their very existence. The alien race had called for help, and instead, they had summoned the very creatures that would bring about their destruction. In the midst of the chaos, the commander locked eyes with the leader of the beasts once more. There was no fear in the creature's gazingly cold, calculating satisfaction. It was clear that these beasts had no intention of leaving until every last one of the alien soldiers had been crushed beneath their feet. The fight seemed endless. The commander's mind was clouded with desperation, but even as the aliens fought valiantly, they knew the truth: they were losing. The backup they had called for, the salvation they had dreamed of, was nothing more than a death sentence. The city would fall, and with it, their hope. Their hoped up as the commander looked around at the dying city, the once proud civilization now crumbling under the weight of the beast's assault. He realized that this was only the beginning. The fight for survival had just begun, but it was a battle they might not win. And the true cost of their desperation was about to reveal itself in the most brutal way imaginable. The earth beneath the commander's feet vibrated as the battle intensified. The city, once bustling with life and the pride of their species, was now nothing more than a war zone. The sky was painted with fire and smoke as the alien soldiers fought valiantly to hold their ground, but it was clear that the odds were no longer in their favor. The beasts had descended upon them with relentless fury, and their power seemed endless. The commander watched helplessly as his soldiers fell one by one, their advanced weapons no match for the sheer savagery of the creatures. Their claws tore through the alien armor like paper, their monstrous strength pushing the soldiers back, forcing them to retreat further into the city's depths. It was a massacre. The beasts were not only strong, they were vicious, reveling in the destruction they caused. "Commander, we need to retreat. There's no winning this." A voice came through his communicator, the voice of one of his officers. It was full of fear, but also a grim acceptance of the reality they now faced. The commander's chest tightened, his mind racing. He knew the city couldn't withstand much more. Yet retreat meant surrender. It meant giving up their home, their culture, everything they had fought for. But in the face of such overwhelming force, was there any other choice? He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts that clouded his mind. "We fight until the last breath," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But even as he said it, a voice in the back of his mind questioned if that was enough. The city, once a symbol of their strength and unity, was now falling apart piece by piece. And with each piece, the hope of victory slipped further away. The commander's gaze fell on the lead beast, the one who had first spoken to them, the one who seemed to relish the destruction. The creature was a hulking figure, towering over the others, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, effortlessly cutting through the alien soldiers, its blade-like claws raking through their ranks. As the commander's eyes locked with the creature's, he could see the malice in its gaze. This was no ordinary enemy. These beasts were not just conquerors, they were predators. And the alien race, for all its advanced technology, was nothing more than prey. The realization hit the commander with the force of a blow to the chest, but even as despair threatened to take over, something within the commander stirred. He wouldn't accept defeat. Not like this. Not after everything they had sacrificed. He wasn't going to let their world fall without a fight. Even if the odds were against them. He turned to his officers, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We fight back. We show them what we're made of. We may not have the numbers, but we have the will." There was no turning back now. The commander had made his choice, and as the remaining soldiers rallied behind him, they began to regroup. Their weapons glowed brighter than ever, the last remnants of their hope shining in the midst of the battlefield. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would do it again. The only thing that mattered now was surviving to fight another day. With a renewed sense of purpose, the aliens made their stand. They fought back fiercely, using every ounce of strength they had left. The beasts, though stronger and more brutal, were not invincible. The alien soldiers may have been outmatched in raw power, but they had speed, agility, and strategy. They danced around their enemies, using the city's labyrinthine streets to their advantage, setting traps, and catching the beasts off guard. For a moment, it seemed as if they were winning. The beasts were faltering, their ranks thinning. The alien soldiers pushed forward, pushing the creatures back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The battle, it seemed, would never be over. The lead beast, enraged by the resistance, let out a primal roar, a sound that shook the very ground beneath their feet. With a swift motion, the beast raised its massive weapon, an enormous, jagged blade that seemed to shimmer with a dark, dangerous energy, and charged toward the commander. The ground cracked beneath its weight as it advanced, its glowing eyes locked onto its prey. The commander's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He was prepared to die for his people, to die for his home. As the beast lunged forward, he barely had time to react. But in that split second, something unexpected happened. The humans, the unexpected saviors, arrived. Their ships appeared in the sky above, swooping down with impressive speed, their engines roaring like thunder. The human soldiers jumped from their ships, landing in a perfect formation, their advanced weapons already locked and loaded. They fired in unison, their lasers cutting through the beasts like hot knives through butter. The commander's eyes widened in disbelief as the humans charged into the battle, taking the lead and forcing the creatures back. It was a sight the commander never thought he'd see human warriors. Fighting alongside them, their strength and resolve equal to their own. The aliens and humans, once strangers, now fought together, united against a common enemy, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the commander saw a flicker of hope. But the battle was far from over. The beasts, though pushed back, were not yet defeated. The lead creature bellowed in fury, rallying its forces for one final assault. The humans and aliens, side by side, prepared for the ultimate clash. The fate of the planet of their species hung in the balance. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the beast leader's roar echoed through the desolate city, sending a wave of fear through the alien forces. But it wasn't just fear that surged through their ranks. It was also the realization that, for the first time, the enemy wasn't as invincible as they had once believed. The battle had taken a turn, humanity had entered the fray, and with them came the hope that the alien race had so desperately clung to. The first human soldiers landed with perfect precision, their armor gleaming under the war-torn sky. Their presence was like a thunderclap, a powerful force that seemed to give the alien soldiers a second wind. They watched as the humans, armed with advanced weaponry, engaged the beasts with a ruthless efficiency that sent shivers down the commander's spine. It was clear now that the humans were a force to be reckoned with, and for the first time, the commander felt something he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever: hope. The human soldiers didn't hesitate. They moved with precision, their weapons firing in perfect synchronization, cutting through the beasts like a blade through flesh. The aliens, once outmatched and outclassed, now found themselves with new ally soldiers who understood war on a level that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They fought as one, human and alien soldiers side by side, their combined strength turning the tide of the battle. But as the battle raged on, the commander couldn't help but wonder how the humans had arrived so quickly, how they had known exactly when and where to strike. The answer came quickly enough. The lead human soldier, tall, imposing figure with a scar running across his cheek, moved toward the commander. His eyes were filled with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen death countless times. "We've been watching," the human said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable strength. "We knew you'd need help. You weren't the only ones watching the stars." The commander felt a knot tighten in his chest. The humans had been aware of the invasion long before they had called for backup. They had been waiting, prepared. It was a strange feeling, one of admiration, but also of guilt. How long had the humans known? How long had they been observing, silently, before they had chosen to intervene? The human soldier's words echoed in the commander's mind. "We knew you'd need help." He looked around at the battlefield, at the alien soldiers now fighting alongside the humans. The collaboration between the two races was something the commander never thought he'd see. Aliens and humans, once strangers, now fighting together, united by the common goal of survival. The battle was no longer a one-sided massacre. The beasts, though still formidable, were slowly being pushed back. The aliens' weapons, combined with the humans' superior firepower, created a deadly force that the beasts could no longer ignore. The tide of the battle was shifting, but the commander knew that victory was still far from certain. The beasts, realizing they were being outmatched, called for reinforcements. More monstrous creatures began to emerge from the darkness, their eyes glowing with the same malice as the first wave. The ground rumbled as the beasts' reinforcements advanced, and the alien soldiers braced themselves for what would surely be a bloody and brutal counterattack. But before the battle could reach its peak, something unexpected happened. A massive explosion shook the earth. The shockwave sent both alien and human soldiers tumbling to the ground, their weapons falling from their hands. Smoke and dust filled the air, obscuring their vision. The commander struggled to rise, his body aching from the impact. When the dust began to clear, he saw it. A new force had entered the fray. The sky above was filled with ships, sleek, shining, and unmistakably human. Their engines roared as they descended toward the battlefield, their weapons primed and ready. The reinforcements weren't just soldiers, they were the real backup ships designed for one purpose: to end the war. The commander watched in awe as the ships released their payloads, laser-guided missiles that tore through the enemy ranks, decimating the beasts with pinpoint accuracy. The battle, which had once seemed hopeless, was now shifting in favor of the combined forces. The alien soldiers and humans fought with newfound strength, their unity a force to be reckoned with. The commander's heart raced as he watched the beasts fall one by one. The tide had finally turned, but there was still work to be done. The battle was far from over. The commander turned to the human soldier once more, who was now reloading his weapon. "What now?" he asked. "Is it over?" The human soldier glanced around, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Not yet. The beasts are still out there, hiding, but we'll find them. We'll end this." The commander nodded, his determination hardening. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt like they had a chance, a real chance. The humans had brought them hope, and together they would fight until the very end. As the smoke cleared, and the last remnants of the enemy forces were wiped out, the commander stood tall, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. He looked to the human soldier, who was now standing beside him, his face covered in dust but his eyes burning with resolve. Together they had faced an impossible enemy, and together they had won. The battle was over, but the real test, the fight for their future, was just beginning. The sounds of battle had finally begun to die down, but the air remained thick with tension. Smoke curled into the sky from the remnants of fallen ships and shattered buildings, and the earth beneath them still trembled from the violence that had just transpired. The battlefield was littered with debris, with bodies of both the alien soldiers and the beasts scattered across the city streets. But the true cost of the war was yet to be understood. The humans and aliens had fought side by side, but in the quiet after the storm, the commander knew that the fight was far from over. He stood on the edge of the battlefield, looking out over the devastation. The beasts that had once seemed unstoppable were now retreating, their numbers diminished, their morale shattered. But he knew better than to assume victory was certain. The enemy was cunning, and though they had been pushed back, they would not forget the humiliation they had just suffered. They would regroup, plan, and strike again, harder, faster, more dangerous than before. The commander's thoughts were interrupted by the hum of approaching engines. He turned to see the human soldiers, their faces grim, yet determined, making their way toward him. They had fought valiantly, and their presence had turned the tide of the battle. But now, it seemed they were preparing for something far more difficult than they could have anticipated. One of the human commanders, a tall woman with short-cropped hair and a laser-scarred uniform, stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto the commander's, her face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "We did what we could, but they're not finished yet," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of concern. The commander nodded, his gaze shifting to the horizon. The night was falling, and with it came the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. "We need to be ready. We cannot let our guard down. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg." The human commander's face tightened as she glanced at her team. "We've already lost so much, but we can still win this together." She placed a hand on his shoulder, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had seen death, they had witnessed destruction, but they were not ready to surrender. Not yet. The commander turned and addressed his own soldiers, his voice loud and clear. "Gather what remains of the fleet. We rebuild. We regroup. This war is not over. Not by a long shot." His soldiers, though battered, stood tall at his command. They were fighters, and in this fight, they would not yield. As the night grew darker, the air grew colder. The humans and aliens began to work side by side, hauling debris, salvaging what they could, and preparing for the inevitable second wave. They set up their defenses, knowing full well that the enemy would not let their humiliating defeat go unanswered. In the silence between orders, the commander found himself lost in thoughts. He stood alone on a nearby ridge, gazing down at the smoldering ruins of the city. The battle had been brutal, the costs had been heavy. But despite everything, despite the death and destruction, there was something that had shifted in him. The alliance with humanity had proven that their worlds, though vastly different, were not as dissimilar as they had once believed. The memories of their first contact, so distant, now seemed almost unreal. The alien race had viewed humans as primitive, unworthy of being allies. But today, that perception had changed. The humans had fought with a fierceness, a determination, and a skill that even the aliens had not anticipated. They had become more than allies. They had become brothers in arms, united by the shared need to survive. The commander turned away from the ridge and walked back toward the camp. There was no time for reflection, no time for rest. The enemy would return, and when they did, it would be far worse than anything they had faced so far. The reinforcements that had come to their aid had been unexpected, but now they needed more than just firepower. They needed strategy, intelligence, and unity. "We need to make a plan," the commander muttered to himself, more as a reminder than a statement. He walked toward the makeshift command center where the human and alien leaders were gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion. There were no more words of comfort or promises of victory, just cold, hard resolve. The human commander stepped forward as he entered the tent. "We've got a couple of hours before the next wave. We need to coordinate. Our technology is different, but it's strong. We need to combine everything we've got or we'll never hold them off." The commander glanced at the map of the city, a red circle marking the position of the advancing enemy forces. "We'll hold the line here," he said, pointing to a series of defensive positions. "We'll use the narrow streets to our advantage, funnel them into choke points. No matter what, we don't let them break through." The human commander nodded in agreement. "We'll set up our heavy artillery here, here, and here. But we need more reinforcements. We need fresh troops to reinforce the outer positions." The two commanders stood together, their eyes fixed on the map, their minds working as one. It was an alliance forged in the fires of war, a bond that had only grown stronger with every passing hour. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for each other. As the night passed and the first light of dawn began to break, the battle lines were set. The human and alien forces, working together, created a defense that no one thought possible. They were ready. The next wave would come, but this time they would be ready for it. The commander took one last look at the horizon before returning to his soldiers. They stood, silent but ready. The war was far from over, but together they had a chance to win, and they would fight for it no matter what the cost. The sky above the battlefield was filled with a strange stillness as the first light of dawn began to break. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. The humans and the alien forces had worked tirelessly through the night, fortifying their positions, recalibrating their weapons, and preparing for the inevitable second wave of the beasts. They had no illusions about what was to come. They had seen the brutality of the creatures up close, and they knew that the worst was still ahead. The commander stood at the front of their makeshift command center, staring out over the battlefield, his eyes scanning the horizon. The city around them was a ghost of what it had once been, torn apart by the relentless forces of the beasts. The scars of battle visible in every crumbled building and shattered street. But there was a resolve now, a unity that had never existed. Before, humans and aliens, once divided by their differences, now stood together in the face of an unimaginable enemy. The commander could hear the hum of distant engines as the first of the enemy reinforcements began to approach. He turned to his second-in-command, a warrior whose face had seen too many battles, too many losses. "Get ready," he said, his voice low and steady. "They'll come at us with everything they've got this time." She nodded, her grip tightening around the weapon in her hand. "We'll be ready, sir. They won't break us." The ground rumbled as the beasts' war machines thundered toward the city's defensive lines. The humans and aliens had set up a wall of weapons and barricades, but the sheer size and power of the creatures were overwhelming. The commander could see the massive silhouettes of the beasts' warships rising above the skyline, their forms looming like dark omens. It was clear now that this would be the final pusher battle that would determine the fate of their worlds. The alien commander's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen battles before, but nothing like this. The scale of destruction, the weight of the stakes, this was different. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. He looked at the humans standing beside him, their faces set with determination, their weapons ready. In this moment they were no longer allies, they were family. "Deploy the heavy artillery," the commander ordered, his voice echoing across the camp. The human soldiers quickly moved into position, their machinery clicking into place, their guns aimed at the approaching enemy. The alien forces readied their own weapons, their energy cannons humming to life. The air crackled with the tension of impending battle, every soldier poised, every soldier waiting. And then, as the beasts came into full view, the silence was shattered. The first volley of fire erupted from the human artillery, followed by a barrage of energy blasts from the alien weapons. The ground shook with the impact as explosions rocked the battlefield, sending clouds of smoke and debris into the air. The commander could see the beasts charging forward, their monstrous forms moving with terrifying speed, their weapons firing relentlessly, but they weren't prepared for what came next. The humans and aliens had worked together, blending their technologies in ways that neither had anticipated. As the first wave of beasts charged, they were met with a new kind of weapon, a hybrid of human technology and alien ingenuity. The human artillery systems had been adapted with alien energy cores, giving them a power the beasts hadn't accounted for. As the first beast fell, another was quickly taken down, its body crumpling to the ground in a fiery explosion. The commander's heart raced as he watched the beasts falter. They were not as unstoppable as they had once seemed. The combined forces of humans and aliens were pushing back, their defenses stronger than ever before. But it wasn't enough. The beasts were relentless. They adapted quickly, their numbers seemingly endless. "Push forward," the commander shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We can't let them break through." The soldiers surged forward, moving as one, pushing the beasts back inch by inch. The commander fought alongside them, his weapon firing with precision, his mind focused entirely on the battle at hand. But as the minutes turned into hours, he began to feel the weight of exhaustion creeping in. His body ached, his vision blurred, but he couldn't stop. Not now, not when so much was at stake. The battlefield had become a blur of fire, smoke, and blood. The beasts fought with a savagery that seemed to have no end, but the humans and aliens were holding their own. Slowly, methodically, they wore down the enemy, cutting them down one by one. But still, the commander couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something they hadn't accounted for. Just as he was about to voice his concern, the ground beneath them shifted. A low rumble turned into a deafening roar. The commander's eyes widened as a massive figure rose from the depths of the city's ruins. It was unlike anything they had faced before. A creature so large, so powerful, that the battlefield seemed to shrink in comparison. The new enemy was enormous, its body covered in thick, armored plates, its eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. It was the leader of the beasts, the one who had remained hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, it had arrived. The commander felt a chill run down his spine. This was the final challenge, the last obstacle. But he couldn't afford to show fear, not now. He turned to his soldiers, his voice filled with determination. "We end this here, together." The human commander, standing beside him, nodded grimly. "We fight until the end. We've come this far. We can't stop now." The two armies surged forward, charging toward the monstrous leader of the beasts. The battle raged on, fiercer than ever, as the commander and his soldiers faced their greatest challenge yet. But they fought with everything they had. They fought for their homes, for their families, for each other. And as the final battle unfolded, the commander knew one thing for sure: no matter what happened, they would not go down without a fight. The war for their world was about to reach its final, deadly climax. And in this moment, there was nothing more powerful than their will to survive.